This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Thanks, everybody, for checking us out. Welcome to another episode of the Detroit Sports Countdown Podcast. I am the Doc, John Macaroon. This is our 17th edition, where we rank the top 5 stories in the world of Detroit sports, and lots to get to this week. But before we hit on a little bit of sports, man, the city of Detroit is still recovering from the debate on Thursday. My goodness. You know, you had Ben Carson's excusing himself from the race, and that led to a debate with 4 Republican candidates, and you really got a chance to see what politics is nowadays. The people are so against the establishment that a guy like Donald Trump, who really has who has expressed limited policies to the people in most of the debates, but he throws out a few catchphrases. The reason why Donald Trump is succeeding is basically due to the complete lack of relatability to the rest of the politicians in the field. I mean, you really look at it, basically Donald Trump is running on the premise that I'm basically different, I'm not a politician, and that is garnering him a lot of respect and a lot of votes, and he's winning states, and he's racking up those delegates. So it's very fascinating to see what's been going on, and the scene around the Fox Theater in Detroit was unbelievable. It's unfortunate that they only spent maybe 10 minutes talking about Detroit. It's really unfortunate that a lot of the tone was negative, and, you know, it's just unfortunate that it's really hard to turn around your reputation when it has been sullied like that, like the city of Detroit has been. But Detroit was on the map again for the better part of the last week, and Thursday was a great day having the debate, and hopefully everyone gets out there and votes. But in the world of Detroit sports, my goodness, lots to get to on this Countdown podcast. Love doing this podcast, get a chance to watch what's going on in the world of Detroit sports week in, week out, and kind of look at what's been happening, what's been going on, what are the things that are occurring that are interesting to the doc, and what are interesting to those that might be downloading. Before we get to the countdown, we always want to thank the fine sponsors of the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. Without our fine sponsors, we couldn't roll out 6 to 7 podcasts every week. We wouldn't be able to grow, and we wouldn't be able to kind of establish ourselves as a nice brand around town where our, guys like Vito Churko, who are great journalists, get out there and just kind of say, hey, I'd like to cover your practice, Oakland University, or he'll dial up the University of Detroit Mercy and talk to their women's basketball coach, Coach Bernard Scott, and that was a fine interview this week. And we had a lot of fun stuff. We're doing a lot of fun things here at the network, and love seeing what we've been doing and what the other networks have been doing as well. Podcasting has taken off, and I'm enjoying seeing what everybody has been doing. All right, let's kick off this countdown. Number 5 this week. My goodness, we have to check in with what's been going on with our college basketball programs. Let's start off with Michigan State, and they, had a wonderful senior day, and it was highlighted by, the great play of Costello, the great play of Denzel Valentine, and it really is a showcase of what Tom Izzo has done with that Michigan State program. I mean, to get to see everybody kiss the block S and to play a solid game and to really be able to put on a show in front of the great fans at the Breslin Center was outstanding, and it was cool to see. And after the game, Denzel Valentine wasn't hesitant at all, showed a little bit of bravado, was able to come out and say, hey, I believe this team is talented enough. I'm going to go out there and make the statement. I believe Michigan State's going to win the national title. I guarantee it. So Denzel Valentine has the cojones, has the bravado to go out there, stand in front of the media, and allow himself to take the heat, put himself out there, and now it'll be up to the rest of the team to kind of bring it home. Tom Izzo also reiterated that there aren't too many teams out that he's had where he actually felt like legitimately that they could win it all, and he believes this team is one of those teams that can put themselves in that position to exactly win the entire NCAA tournament. So now we're at the month of March, and a lot of people say, okay, this is the month that Tom Izzo brings it. This is the month where Michigan State shines in Big Ten tournaments, shines in the NCAA tournament. If they continue to have that success, then maybe potentially we're going to see a Michigan State-Iowa for the Big Ten tournament title. And if Michigan State has success in Indianapolis, we're going to have a chance to see them earn a number 1 or number 2 seed. And this is the time of year everyone gets excited. March Madness. Get your brackets ready, and you should depending on Michigan State's matchup and what region they get sent to, they should have a strong chance to make a deep run, maybe to the Elite Eight, Final Four, or hey, maybe this year is the year that Michigan State brings Tom Izzo his second title. Now, it's going to be tough because there's a lot of great teams out there, that are going to be competing. We'll see how Michigan State shakes up based on how this tournament bracket rolls out, because it's nice to see how, depending on who's in their region, who's going to be in the other region, if they get to the Final Four, should they win their region? I can't wait. I can't wait to see how this progresses for Michigan State. Now, to turn the tides a little bit, Karis LeVert, he was shut down. It was a situation where his plight was evaluated for the better part of the season after his injury, and a lot of people were wondering, okay, why did he get shut down? Was he kind of saving himself for the NBA? Did he put forth the greatest effort to come back? The injuries to Karis LeVert and Spike Albrecht, two seniors that were supposed to provide that leadership. You can't underscore the fact that you had two players that were there in 2013 when they made that run. They were young players at the time, and they gained invaluable experience. And you would have thought that this year, had they both played, Spike Albrecht, unfortunately, with the hip problems, he had to shut it down. And Karis LeVert, they held out hope. They weren't willing to, the University of Michigan wasn't willing to come out and just shut him down. But in essence, they came out 5 days ago and they said, okay, that's it. Karis LeVert will not play for us anymore. And thus causing and having people debate what a lot of us were already thinking. Karis LeVert, the last couple seasons has been a major disappointment and a major factor in why the University of Michigan has struggled. And unfortunately, while Michigan State had great success on senior day, had a chance to really showcase their talents, Michigan was in a much different spot. They really were grinding and needed a win against Iowa. And man, again, and when you hate to say it, but when they struggle, they don't make their shots, and they were jacking up threes like it was going out of style. And unfortunately, they weren't falling as much as consistently, and Iowa took the game. Michigan loses out on senior day, probably now is planted firmly on the bubble. They're going to need to basically win Thursday, Friday, Saturday, basically 3 straight games in 3 straight days to have any chance of maybe even with that. I think if they don't have a strong performance in the Big Ten, then they're not going to make the NCAA tournament, which would mean 2 seasons without being entered into the NCAA tournament. And you can't have that at a program like Michigan. It's just unacceptable. So the season has been quite a disappointment. And a lot of people will say that's just kind of this team this year, the 2015-2016 version of the Wolverines, lacks size, lacks defensive heart, and kind of lacks that, that killer instinct in order to be able to compete at the highest level. And so that's what John Beilein is faced with. He does have nice names coming in the next recruiting class. So a lot of people are tweeting us at Detroit Podcast, well, should John Beilein be fired? What should happen now because of the tough seasons? I think you firmly say that the 2016-2017 season is a make or break. If, again, they don't make the tournament, I think you might be looking at the last season with John Beilein as the head coach of the University of Michigan basketball team. So Michigan State, and their senior days and the different paths that they're currently taking, the number 5 story this week in the world of Detroit sports. The number 4 story this week, we got to look at the week that was for the Detroit Red Wings. A little bit of a struggle, Wednesday versus Chicago. You got a chance to see, wow, what the Blackhawks look like nowadays. When the Red Wings were having their great success in the late 90s, Chicago was struggling. I mean, they barely made the playoffs a handful of times. They were looking like a team that was defunct. They were looking like a team that just wasn't satisfactory. But then they bottomed out. And what they did by gaining young talent has been no short of remarkable. They've won 3 Stanley Cups. They're second in points right now in the NHL. The Red Wings are going to face them later on this evening. It's a solid team, and the Blackhawks, if you make a mistake against them, the puck's in your net, hands down. And it was quite interesting that we got a chance to see them on Wednesday, and Chicago put it to us, and it was not very cool, not a great look, and it kind of, that day was a tough day for Detroit sports because you had the Pistons losing and you had the Red Wings losing at the same time, and it was kind of like, oh, how disappointing was that? So, not a great week overall for the Red Wings, but the number 4 story, a look at the struggles of Dylan Larkin. Articles have been kind of posted now lately. When you look at Dylan Larkin's performance lately, you're going to see that in the last 10 games, he's only had 1 point, which was a goal, and hasn't gotten any not a single point in the last 5 games. He's putting up Adam Strozinski type numbers there when he plays in his rec league roller hockey league. So Dylan Larkin being talked about a little bit, being that he's a -7 in the last 10 games, meaning that he's been on the ice for 7 goals, and he hasn't been on the ice for too many goals of the Red Wing zone. So in the last 10 games, Dylan Larkin is a -7. Even though he's had that rough streak, he still leads the Red Wings plus 19 for being on the ice for more goals than the Red Wings have given up. So that's still a good stat. But in that last stretch of games, people are wondering, okay, has he hit that rookie ceiling, and has he hit that situation where, he is struggling now, or he's kind of gripping and going through his first prolonged period of time where he's not as productive? Coach Blashill has tried to shake things up, and he's paired Larkin with another great speedster, Andreas Athanasiou, on a line centered by Brad Richards. It's been okay, but it just feels like that Dylan Larkin is gripping, and it may be getting to him as each game goes by that he doesn't produce a point, because each game, night in, night out, is so important at this point in time. You would hope that Dylan Larkin has a bounce-back game against the Blackhawks because it's needed, but he needs to kind of, whenever you get into a scoring streak, most people will tell you that, hey, all you got to do, throw pucks at the net, try your best to get back to basics, have strong shifts, take it one shift at a time, and then you might find out that just, hey, it doesn't even have to be a highlight reel goal. It could be just getting to the net at the right time and finding that loose puck, and that might be something that, a la Gustav Nyquist, who was struggling, and he had that backhanded goal where he just spun around and boom, puck went into the net. Do believe Dylan Larkin, I'm hoping, has a strong performance this week with the Red Wings. We do need them. We understand goalless streaks. You understand that defenses are going to now key on Dylan Larkin. They're going to send out their best defenseman, and he's going to be a matchup nightmare, and he's going to be a player that opposing teams will have to look at. They're going to have to send out their best, either their A defensive pair or their B defensive pair, in order to stop Dylan Larkin, and he's seeing more and more of that. But it's not just the lack of goals. It's also the lack of points. That means that he's not also helping his teammates out. He's not creating opportunities, and that's a significant thing. And then also, sometimes maybe when you're not scoring offensively, then you might neglect your defensive responsibilities. Now, it's not probably happening too often, but a -7 in that recent stretch is not good. And Dylan Larkin has to be a player that has to contribute. And what has everybody talked about? Why has everybody been so frustrated with the Red Wings with their lack of moves? Is that you feel like this team, as constructed, standing pat. Hell, even the Pistons made some moves knowing that, hey, we're only a 500 team, and we tried to make some moves to improve our roster. Kenny Holland kind of has, in the past few seasons, hamstrung himself, and the lack of confidence with the moves that he's made in recent seasons has probably weighed in on him, and that's why he didn't pull the trigger and make any moves at this trade deadline. It's fairly disappointing when you watch this Red Wings team, because you see a team that with a couple more pieces could be much further along, and now this week you're playing a couple games against Chicago, one of the best teams in the NHL, and you start seeing, man, our power play is struggling, Chicago's is great. Our goaltending is okay, it's not bad. Chicago plays solid defense, and they have their superstars right now currently clicking on all cylinders. So you're right now seeing the difference between where the Red Wings are at and where the Blackhawks are at. And the Blackhawks, again, they made the move, which pissed off our guy, Jack. They brought in Ladd from Winnipeg, and Adam was touting that on podcasts, was putting that out there that, hey, this is a guy and be a solid guy for the Red Wings, and they didn't get him, whether it be contract situations, not wanting to give up too much talent for a guy that maybe you can pick up in free agency. For whatever reason, the Red Wings didn't pull the trigger, and we got to go with it. This is the Red Wings are going to play the hand that's dealt to them, and we got to see what happens. But Dylan Larkin struggles the week that was for the Detroit Red Wings. Number 4 story this week in Detroit sports. Moving right along on the Detroit sports countdown, the number 3 story this week will peek into Tigers spring training. Lots of good performances so far. Got a chance to see Jordan Zimmerman against the Nationals in spring training, and he looks solid. Justin Verlander has been solid. A lot of fun times with the Yankees. Unfortunately, versus the Yankees, they plunked Cameron Maybin on the wrist, and he's now out for a significant period of time. And it just sucks because Cameron Maybin is a guy that is going to need to have a bounce-back year, maybe be a guy on the base pads that could create some more offense. And to be out now, whether it be 4 to 6 weeks, 4 to 5 weeks, whatever the timetable will be for that injury, it's not a great start for him in spring training, and it leaves Ghost to be the only center fielder right now. So they're going to have to look at either bringing up someone from the minors, or they're going to have to look to add another center fielder to potentially start the season should Cameron Maybin struggle out of the gate. And it's not that easy to come back from a wrist injury. So Justin Verlander is a good teammate. Boom. Next game, plunk some of the Yankees. And hey, it wasn't too overblown. The Yankees understood it, and Justin Verlander said it was unintentional and things like that. But anybody that was watching could tell that it was an attempt to retaliate for what the Yankees were doing, and that's just kind of an unwritten baseball rule. You don't plunk our guys and just expect that nothing's going to happen. So Justin Verlander stood up and was able to kind of defend Cameron Maybin and start that game off very interesting versus the Yankees. But the biggest news that I believe was with the Tigers was Anthony Gose coming out and talking a little bit about kind of a thing that players have looked at now for the better part of the last 3 or 4 seasons is the use of advanced sabermetric stats. Ghost came out and said, that stuff is nonsense. I don't look at that. And the reason why, he has every reason to kind of be mad, because a lot of the fans that are looking at the advanced sabermetrics have realized that his numbers are terrible. A guy like that is looking at it and getting critiqued and criticized and talked about, being that he's had very bad advanced sabermetric stats, especially on defense, as opposed to a guy like Yoenis Cespedes, who re-signed with the Mets, who had great advanced sabermetric numbers. And so, I'm a guy that's now learning more and more about the advanced numbers. I'm a guy that's into numbers. I look at them, but I believe I would, if I was managing or how I look at things, I would say I have a strong blend of looking at both the eye test and the use of advanced sabermetrics. But Anthony Gose coming out and talking about it is a very interesting notion, because I don't think guys that are, on the positive end of those numbers are complaining too much, but it's a guy like Anthony Gose who's getting critiqued, who's getting looked at all cross-eyed by the fans. He's out there complaining, whining, and I just think when you talk about that, I think he should have took more of a PC stance. He should show more awareness, because the Tigers as an organization has totally revamped that side of things. Dave Dombrowski was widely regarded as a guy that didn't use those kind of numbers too much. And you can tell that by once Avila was brought on board, you could sense that, because he brought in numbers guys. He brought in a bunch of new guys, new staff members that are going to be, and their job is going to be to look at the numbers and to try and add players that are, that have favorable advanced sabermetric numbers. And so Anthony Gose is a guy that does not have those numbers, and is a guy that, if you look at, if the Tigers were filled with a bunch of Anthony Goses, they would have a terrible roster. Now, he does fit a role, he does have a purpose, but for the most part, you could say that he's been rather disappointing. And that's why, they've made additional moves and things like that. And that's why he's going to have some competition out there in center field. He has to step up. He cannot continue to play the way he did and have those long, terrible offensive spells like he had last year. I mean, everybody thinks, Ghost thinks that, well, I bring value to the team and I do this and I have all these intangibles. That's fine. But when you look at the Tigers' 2015 season and you start wondering, why did they not have success? Some of the reasons are because some of the players that have these numbers that aren't that great defensively, obviously if you're not that great in defense, that adds up to more runs for your opponent. And that's why last year the Tigers were the disparity between how many runs the Tigers scored versus how many runs their opponent scored was way different than in years past. The Tigers gave up way more runs. Well, why is that? If you look at the advanced stats, he's a negative defensive player. So that's why a guy like Anthony Gose has probably come out there when he's being asked about it is a little bit testy, because he's looking at those numbers, and I'm sure he's probably been talked to that he's got to step up his game. And so that's why I believe Anthony Gose should probably really invest in taking the PC approach, giving a professional answer when he's asked about advanced sabermetrics, because it didn't only start with Oakland. I mean, they're the ones that really applied it because of budgetary constraints, so they had to find players that could fit a system on the cheap. But this advanced sabermetrics has spread all over sports, and it's not just the Tigers that are doing it. A lot of major league clubs now have guys that are in charge of looking at these advanced numbers, and that's how they're going to evaluate and decide who to give money to and extend contracts to and who's going to be on the roster. And it's being talked about more and more. We had Mario Mpemba on our podcast several months back, and we asked him, I said, hey, in terms of the broadcast, I hear you guys, you and Rod Allen on the Fox Sports Detroit broadcast, I hear you guys talking more and more about advanced sabermetrics. And he said, yeah, we're getting briefed more and more about it. Little by little, we're getting more of an education regarding how these numbers apply to teams and things like that. And Fox Sports, I believe Fox 2 even had a specific game that was broadcast in correspondence with advanced sabermetrics, where you had these baseball geeks who can just, throw out the numbers in terms of, the 9-inning game and watch it that way. And for me, that really didn't interest me. I'm more traditional. I just want to hear our guys talking about the game. But I do recognize that is now how players are evaluated. So a guy like Anthony Ghost needs to recognize that, be more aware of what's going on, and pick up your performance so that the Tigers can have success this year. So Anthony Ghost and his knocking of advanced sabermetrics, the number 3 story this week in Detroit sports. For the number 2 story this week, let me give a little love to the Horizon League. As a fan of the Big Ten, because I'm a Michigan State Spartan grad, I don't peek into the Horizon League too much as a whole, but in recent seasons, the Metro Series has gained a lot of prestige. You have a lot of great games down at Callahan Hall and Oakland University, 2 universities that are relatively close to where I live and where the podcast office is in Sterling Heights. So it's very easy for me to have access to these nice, intimate basketball arenas. Watch some great action. The Metro Series games have been unbelievable. High scoring, strong play. I mean, when you say true rivalries, you have to start moving up the Oakland University of Detroit Mercy rivalry. Great games. Kay Felder has been outstanding for Oakland University. They're the number 2 seed in the Horizon League tournament. So this week, the number 2 story in the world of Detroit sports, they are down at Joe Louis Arena for the start of sounds like a nice long tournament there, the Horizon League tournament. Saturday was the first round, and you had a lot of great matchups. University of Detroit Mercy came away with a victory. I believe they defeated Youngstown State 3 times this season, and they walked away as number 6 seed, and they were victorious 92-79 over Youngstown State. And it's not always easy to defeat an opponent that many times, but University of Detroit Mercy, led by Bass, has been outstanding this year, and they're going to try to advance and do some damage. Now, today is the second round. You got a couple good matchups. You got number 4 Green Bay versus number 5 Milwaukee. You got number 3 Wright State, and they're going to take on the University of Detroit Mercy, and they're going to be trying to, in their own backyard, basically less than 15 miles away from Callahan Hall is Joe Louis Arena. So they're going to have an opportunity to advance and try to make some waves and make a better case for them in the postseason tournament. Now, for Oakland University, they're going to have high expectations coming into the tournament as a number 2 seed. They're going to be looking to try and earn a NCAA bid. They've had a strong season. Kay Felder had a coming out season this year, and he's a guy that I think has announced that he's going to come back to Oakland University for his senior year and be able to provide some leadership next season. And he said outright, flatly, I think that next year Oakland University is going to be even better than this year. Oakland University is going to have heavy hearts going into the tournament because, whenever a player's father passes away at that tough time, we all remember the scene at Oakland University senior night with Chip Hooper, who passed away. It was such a touching moment. His dad's laying there and they embrace, and it's such a nice photo, a nice scene. But unfortunately, earlier this week, his father passed away. And so Oakland University is going to try to play a strong tournament and honor, Chip Hooper's memory and be able to have a nice storybook ending to the tournament. Now, I do believe Oakland University as a whole, without this extra motivation, had a solid chance to do some damage in this tournament. I believe that they have an all-around game. Greg Kampe is just really an outstanding head basketball coach. He has, proven to be a strong leader and a guy that not only goes out there and tries to get great talent. I mean, it's super hard. You got to imagine what kind of job Greg Kampe has competing with UDM, competing with Michigan State, and he's still bringing in guys who are developing and bringing in guys who have talent. And when you look at the program and when you talk to the players, our own Vito Churko had the opportunity to go down and observe Oakland University's practice. And, Kay Felder got to have an opportunity to talk to Vito Churko on the Vito Sit Down podcast. And we got a chance to learn about, how they practice, how he's kind of overcome some challenges with his height and some, overcoming challenges of perception that, hey, he might be undersized. But you can see that Greg Kampe instills working hard, strong defensive effort, and working as a team. And we really got a chance to see that at the practice there at Oakland University and how well coached they are. That's one thing you do get with these local teams, UDM and Oakland University as two well-coached teams, and I hope for success for them. I hope that UDM, I hope that University of Detroit Mercy, a place I went to get my graduate degree, to get my master's degree, I hope they have continued success because it's a great program. It's one that Mr. McCallum has done a great job in terms of bringing along, and I know they don't make too many NCAA appearances consistently, but they do play a solid brand of basketball, and when you get a chance to go out there, it is very entertaining, and you get a chance to see the likes of the radio guys, you get a chance to see, the guys that check out the University of Detroit Mercy. They got a lot of supporters, and it's always nice to see being a graduate of the University of Detroit Mercy and earning my master's degree there. So the Horizon League tournament, hopefully strong runs for both the University of Detroit Mercy and Oakland University. Number 2 story this week in Detroit sports. The number 1 story. You've waited, and I greatly appreciate everyone that downloads this fine podcast, whether it be on Podomatic, Stitcher, Podbay, iTunes, DetroitSportsNation.com, our website, DetroitSportsPodcast.com. We greatly appreciate those who have been supporting us. Allows us to keep putting out great products, great podcasts, great audio content, and allows us to really have a lot of access that we would not have otherwise if it wasn't for your support. So we greatly appreciate it. So you work a long day, you're having fun, you get home, and you're like, okay, I believe I'm going to tune into the Pistons-Knicks, a game where if the Pistons just play solidly, play as a team, play defensively, play as a unit, play like they have been, in that strong winning streak. Did they do that versus the Knicks? Hell no. They put on a lousy performance in another situation where Stan Van Gundy has to come out and be like, again, we were just awful on defense. We allowed them way too many points in the second quarter. We were terrible on a lot of fronts. Reggie and KCP were absolutely abysmal. Andre got abused again by Lopez. I mean, seriously, Lopez must circle the calendar like 15 times whenever he sees the Pistons because he knows that he's going to get a chance to abuse Andre Drummond. Again, seriously? At this point in time, Andre Drummond should be able to go up against opponents where he's gone up against before and make adjustments. Lopez was just able to go out there on the court at Madison Square Garden and just handle business, and it was unfortunate to see. And a lot of people, like our own Vinny Stubbs, was saying, man, when the Pistons struggle like that, it really makes you question, are you patient enough with Reggie Jackson in his first season at this point in time? There's a reason why Reggie Jackson was just kind of allowed to leave OKC. There was a reason they traded him away to the Pistons. Yes, they have Russell Westbrook, and they got a guy that's a franchise point guard, but Reggie Jackson is a guy that's a volume shooter, and when it's not falling, you see what you saw versus the Knicks. I mean, both him and KCP, it's really frustrating, and I know we're all asked to be patient, but we're well over halfway through this season. You're not rookies anymore. You've been basically here for the better part of a year, Reggie Jackson. You haven't kind of caught on to the system. Yes, I know down the line he'll be further along and will be more productive, but at this point in time, he's needed so bad. Reggie Jackson is needed to do a lot of different things, and that performance versus the Knicks is totally unacceptable. I believe as I'm recording this podcast, the Pistons are squarely at 500 with their record. They're firmly planted as the 8th seed. But if they don't have stronger performances, I believe they're going to take on the Portland Trail Blazers this evening at the Palace as I'm recording this. But they need to have a much better performance, in order to go forward and really try to reach their goals. And right now, their play has just not been good. I do believe that when you looked at how they played versus San Antonio, you did get a glimpse that this team could compete. I mean, they played solidly for a half versus San Antonio, but then you saw the coaching kick in. I mean, Greg Popovich basically went to his lair at halftime, was like, okay, boom, 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 we can do this, caused the Pistons to look absolutely abysmal on offense. If you look at that game versus San Antonio, that first half, the Spurs were kind of feeling out the Pistons, seeing what they were doing offensively. Reggie and KCP were doing okay. Andre was doing okay. Then in the second half, it was like the light switch turned on. San Antonio clamped down on defense, and then the Pistons were not able to adjust mentally, and you saw a plethora of mistakes. You saw one-on-one play. You saw all the things that you usually see with the Pistons when they struggle. An inability to... What you see with the Pistons is unbelievable when they're playing great. They move the ball, and like I talked about on the Doc and Jock podcast, their offense is much more fluid, and smoother with Tobias Harris. But once San Antonio clamped down, you saw the ball stop moving. It was like unbelievable how much the ball movement was significant in that second half versus that first half. Go back and watch it. The ball movement in the second half is really downright ridiculous. And why that happened, combination of San Antonio's improved defense, their adjustments, and the Pistons kind of failing to rise to the occasion, failing to execute and matching up the intensity with San Antonio. And it was just obvious to see. And so then to follow that up with an abysmal performance versus the Knicks, that should have been a game where you wanted to come back and show, okay, that performance, that second half was just, a situation where we ran into a great world caliber championship team in San Antonio, but that's not what you did. You played horrible. And those kind of performances I thought were behind us. Now, you can lose games. That's going to happen. But to play like that is absolutely unacceptable, and they better turn it around, because if they don't make the playoffs, it's going to be a terrible disappointment, especially with this team. This team could use some experience in the playoffs and could use the experience of a 7-game series, whether it be versus Cleveland or Toronto. And I do believe if they get into the postseason, they're not going to just go away meekly. I don't believe that at all. I believe they'll compete, win a couple games, but I hope they get a chance to earn that experience. So the Pistons' abysmal play this week, the number one story in the world of Detroit sports, according to me, the Doc. Thanks again for downloading all the various podcasts on our platform. Check us out, DetroitSportsPodcast.com. Thank you, everybody. I'll talk to everybody next week. Thank you for listening to the 17th edition of the Detroit Sports Countdown.
Baba, this is cool. Baba, you're the best.